So call the meeting to order. I'd like to start with the approval of the agenda. Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second? Is there a second?
Who a second?
Darlene, thank you. No members of the public here? No? Obviously we have a number of guests here this morning. Harold Dominguez, City Manager. I'd like to introduce people from the Friends Board, if you'd say your name and what you are doing here.
Hi, I'm Laura Ambler. I'm the secretary for the Friends, and I'm here because I was invited and it sounded like something I needed to know about and share with the Friends.
I'm Donna Prestwood. I'm brand new to the board of the Friends, and I've come here to meet people and just become familiar with the whole process.
And I'm Karen Roney. I'm the president of the Friends Board, and I came to hear what Harold had to say. Or
I was gonna say, we don't know each other.
How many years? Oh,
I
my
was
God.
just, yeah, so
Yeah.
there you go.
All right. Approval of previous minutes last month. I only saw one correction with the numbering of the items. I think number 8 or number 9 was missing. Went from 6 to 9, I believe. Oh, there's Lonnie. Good morning.
So I have a couple of,
Please.
so under guests, it says Kim Greenwald is after Phil Greenwald. And under, where Katie Fallon was speaking, it said the program, Longmont was launched in 2025, it was actually 2024.
Thank you.
We jumped ahead there a bit.
Anyone else? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion with changes.
Second?
Second.
Eric? It's approved. So, new business, I'm going to present the draft presentation to Harold this morning. He'll be discussing things going on in Longmont, all the updates from various committees, standing committees. So in the interest of time, let's get started. Last year, when new board members came on board, Dave Brennan, the chair, challenged us to expand our experience of sharing with the council, to be more responsive and let them know about things that are affecting seniors here in Longmont. So the past year has been spent on developing other areas for us to focus on that affect seniors. We looked first at what the group had done in the past, and that led us to some statistical information and data, and ultimately this focus on food security as an issue for seniors here in Longmont. And that led us to security and access is already being done by the Human Services Department and request ultimately for advocacy for food security for seniors. Our past focus has been on transportation, housing, sustainability, and outreach. Those are still focuses on the board. We still want to give information to the city council about those issues. And after Harold's speech this morning, some of the committee members who represent these groups will also like to speak a bit about them. So how do we start off? We started looking at the city priorities, what the council and the city put forth to us. Actually, Harold presented on this last year. And we came down to looking at food security as something that is not talked about. Although the city addresses it in a number of different things with the Human Services Department. But it's not called out specifically. And the belief is that if we don't call it out specifically, we remain stigmatized. I got admonished about calling it food security. I'll talk about that in a second, by a department head here in the city. We want to focus, we want to ask the city council to call this out as a specific need and focus on making it a priority of the city. Human priorities, if you ask anybody, tell me, list the 4 basic needs, food always comes up as one of those needs, always. It's a basic need, and the problem with being basic, if you can't meet basic needs, you become stigmatized by not being able to do that. And it's that stigma that I think holds us back from addressing this as a specific need. So we began to look at food security with Community Food Share, which is a large provider of food to support organizations here in Longmont. And they said at that point, over 1 million pounds of food is distributed each month, and the majority of that food goes to Longmont. That was our first surprise, that much food comes in here. However, the city has always functioned through the Human Services Department and funds nonprofits, public community farmers market, public health, Growing Garden, Meals on Wheels, Our Center, Project Angel. There's money being spent there. Over $300,000 going out this year to fund these various organizations. The city recognizes the need. We just want them to recognize it a little more vocally. The city recognizes, we started looking for what's the issue as it pertains to seniors. The city recognized in 2016 in their vision report, older adults are going to be the largest segment of our population who require special needs and special services. The Nielsberg research of this year, of February this year, the population is getting 99,000 people. Of that, these 3 groups below represent almost 31% of the population. That is people from 55 to 65 plus. And the fastest growing demographic in this group are people over 85. So we're a growing population and we're living longer. We're going to put more demand on city services. With those numbers before, and people said, well, that's just baby boomers pushing the numbers. Not true. The next 4 age groups, from age 54 down to 35, each of those 5-year segments represent about 6.5% of the upcoming population. So we're lasting longer, there's going to be more of us over 65 soon. So here's why I was sort of admonished by Carmen Ramirez, recently retired from the city, when she said, if you call it food insecurity, you continue to stigmatize the need for people having basic food needs. You shouldn't call it that. But it's a term of art, so we use it here, but I'm going to change that as we go forward and talk about food security and food access. But the current definition of food insecurity is not having access to sufficient food or food of an adequate quality to meet one's basic needs. The USDA is a little more blunt, a little more forward. People don't have enough food and don't know where the next meal is coming from. But I like the first one better, it sounds better to me. But food insecurity, again, continues the stigma that exists for people not being able to meet that basic need. Community Food Share, in a paper they put out early last year, that 9.25% of seniors in Colorado are food insecure. They followed up in that same document saying, we think that number is low, and we think it's also low in the city of Longmont. What's the impact on food insecurity for seniors? Adults who are even marginally food insecure will present equivalent of 14 years older in terms of daily living limitations. What that means is they start to put more demands on services, that their ability to work into retirement becomes harder. Again, they become more of an issue of needing support that food insecurity would help solve. Those same people, according to the Aging Well June 2024 report, 36% have at least a minor problem meeting daily expenses, 44% feel they have fair to poor availability of affordable quality food. Community Food Share went on to say the average cost of meal, I found this startling. The average meal cost in Boulder County are 28% up since 2018, 18% higher than the rest of Colorado, 37% higher than the rest of the United States. The average meal cost.
Do we know why?
They didn't address that. They just gave us statistics and saying the statistic enough was startling to me. That it's that high. And I challenged them and said, you mean higher than New York? Yes. They're pretty clear in Boulder County.
We like to eat.
Now, so we know the costs are higher here, and yet, in the same report, seniors seniors, it's all about older Americans. 79% are very likely to remain in the community through retirement, so they're gonna stay here. They feel living here is excellent, a good place, 87%. They like living here. This is a big issue for me, and it caused the focus of the food insecurities to spread from seniors to seniors and children. We look at the economic contribution again in this report. Longmont has the highest economic contribution by older adults, $155 million. Volunteers, childcare, and taking care of older adults. But the impact of care for children began to expand because of our relationship with the Human Services Department. We began to see the connection between not only seniors and children. So what's the impact of food insecurity? The reactive costs, if we don't address it, this is what happens. Food insecurity strikes, coping strategies, people still need to eat, but they're not making good dietary decisions. Higher sodium, higher sugar, which is going to lead to chronic disease, which affects workability. Someone in their 50s and 60s can't work, they're having health issues, they can't work, their income goes down, the healthcare dependability starts to go up, the costs begin to rise, household income comes down, and spending trade-offs happen. They still need to put food on the table, but they're going to put food higher in sugar, higher in salt, and that leads to diabetes and other issues, health issues. It's a vicious circle if we are strictly in a reactive mode. How to be proactive? This was pretty clear. To reduce food insecurity, the trickle-down economic effect becomes pretty evident pretty quick, especially at the bottom, the impact on health and what that means. And the city, through its mental health endeavors, knows that food insecurity affects mental health. So there's a recognition of the need. It's just, I believe, needs to be called out more to get the city to focus on a couple of reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. It became evident with our work with the Human Services Department that things are being done. The red box on the far left talks about the various activities that are in place now. Working with Choose Youth and Family, for low-income assistance, the advisory board, housing and wellness. There's a lot of things being done, and the resources that are being directed towards this issue are there and in play. The yellow are examples of how that's happening. There's already been money spent, I said earlier, $312,000 that is being spent through community food share, Meals on Wheels, farmers market. The city is doing that work. Angel Heart. This is all money, that $312,000 that's being dedicated to food security currently. We also know that we make a presentation to the City Council in May, and there's been interest from various food support organizations to be there in support of what the advisory board is doing for food security and security for seniors. There's also a lot of information available through GIS, Geographical Information Systems, to describe what issues face the city and face seniors specifically. For example, both the city and the Boulder County Health Services has pretty detailed maps about, for example, where there are food deserts, where people live more than a mile away from good food sources, King Super as opposed to 7-Eleven. The city has that information, so does the county. We also know where people have eligibility for SNAP benefits and don't apply. There are areas of Longmont where 76% of the people that are eligible for SNAP benefits don't apply. Why? Stigma. If they can't meet their basic needs, what does that mean about them? And stigma, by the way, means a stain. It means public disapproval. So there's public disapproval about people asking for help around basic needs. The green addresses what we'd like to have happen. We'd like to see there be more expansion of community food kitchens, the commissary with youth, family, and more specifically get into grant writing. And part of the request for grant writing will be, I talked about in the last slide, the recognition by the city as food access as a priority. And ultimately to write grants and get awards for food security later in 2026. As I said, the city's doing a lot already for youth and family services. There's a lot of issues around the unhoused and how to feed them. The organization we already support, the neighborhood resources are being committed. But even they see the issue about stigma around food security. That's the issue I believe we really want the city to help us with. So the last slide is how can food security be added as a priority when it comes to the upcoming budget cycle? And as Carol, how can we more clearly advocate that council make this a priority, stated priority, for two reasons. One, to destigmatize the issue around food security, and equally as important, to give us the ability when we write grants and go seeking research and grant money, that we can say we can state it's a city priority. We can show the city spending money there already, but we want to be able to say it's a stated priority that they want to address food security as an issue for seniors. Thank you. Any questions? Comments?
Well done, by the way.
What's that?
Well done.
Oh,
There's a
thank you.
lot of information there, so thank you.
Yeah, one of the things we discovered when we got into this is that we thought food security was this kind of an issue, but the more we got into it, the bigger it got. We know from Lonnie, from Arlene, and from Ann about talking to various organizations. People here have been very helpful in exploring food security for seniors.
Good issue.
Should I do a drum roll?
Hmm?
Should I do a drum roll for you?
Oh no, sure. Actually, yeah.
Yeah.
It's my turn.
You're up.
Interesting presentation. Really good.
Thank you.
I think what we're talking about. You know, I've thought a lot about. So I've actually been going to various boards and commissions. A couple of weeks ago, I was with the museum board. I have this group, and I think I'm going to the library board soon. And you know, one of the interesting pieces we're in is if we talk to all of the boards, you know, there's different requests. How do we get a priority? How do we, you know, everybody's scrambling for funding. The one thing that I think is really starting to resonate with me is we're in a world today that we've never seen. I am 25 years into my career, 20 years as a city manager this April. I've never seen it. I look to my other colleagues who started before me and go, have we ever seen this before? And the answer is no. And it's going to sound doomsday-ish, and in some ways it is. When I start looking at microeconomics and macroeconomics and things that are in play, everything that we used to have as potentially a tool, a large number of those tools are going away. And, you know, when we talk about food security, food access and security ties to housing ties to these other pieces. And when we talk about things like grants and all of those other issues, we don't know what's going to exist. All right, we don't know what's going to exist in a month right now in terms of what we're dealing with. A few weeks ago, I woke up on a Tuesday morning. I actually think we were having a housing authority meeting that day, and I checked the news, and it's like we're freezing all the federal funds. So it's like, oh, holy smokes, what does this mean for us? Obviously, that sort of resolved itself in the near term, but not in the mid or the long term. And we continually see departments staffing being reduced, uncertainty in funding. You know, I didn't get a chance to watch the president, you know, last night. I was in a council meeting. And for me, in my position, and most people know this, I'm going to talk about things in an apolitical way. because under my CMA Code of Ethics, I am unaffiliated. But the reality is we don't know what's coming. Literally yesterday, I have staff that has a call with HUD, and all of a sudden my Teams channel starts going bonkers about we need to talk. And I still have to digest it, but I do think in terms of how HUD has approached housing choice vouchers and project-based vouchers is something that's going to be a challenge for us, especially when we look at shortfall funding and how we're going to approach that. So I think the message I'm going to get is prepare to not have the shortfall funding budget and other things. I don't know for sure, so don't quote me on that. So we see that there. We see it in transportation. We see it in these other areas. Which then, when you look at that piece and what the influence is happening there in terms of funding sources, and then you slide in locally or to the state and the local area, and you start evaluating what's happening within our state and local economy, we start seeing different things. So I was reading a few economic reports yesterday. Consumer confidence is dipping. You know, job creation is weird right now in terms of what we're seeing. But there was a really good presentation with the state demographer at the Longmont Economic Development Partnership Forum in terms of what we're starting to see. And so the question came up earlier. So why is food more expensive here? Well, if you talk to restaurants or you talk to grocery stores, you know, there are things that are impacting them that's impacting everyone nationally. That's the cost of the products. If you think about the tariff conversation that's going on right now, that's not going to help the cost of products. They talk about cost of labor. They talk about increases in insurance costs. And so when you talk to these businesses, they're like getting hammered from every direction in terms of what that cost really means. And so it's driving up the cost in different places. We're starting to see some folks making decisions in terms of jobs because, you know, you have to manage your cost in some way. And so what you're seeing some places do is really working to get more efficient because they have to reduce what they can. And if it's reducing their labor costs, then they're reducing their labor costs and to manage all of these other cost increases. So that's in play. and so as I look to the budget coming in next year, 24 was pretty volatile for a few things. So one, the 23 and the 24 and 25 budgets were impacted by various pieces of state legislation. So over those two legislative cycles, the state adjusted how we looked at the property tax ratio twice. For the 24 budget, we estimated that that was about $1 million reduction in property tax. I think it was about $1 million. For the adjustment that was made in 24 for 25, we estimated that was a $2.6 million reduction. And so as we were heading into this budget process, and if you all know Jim Golden, this was his last year here, and we were commiserating with each other that this was probably his hardest budget ever to deal with because we were having to guess. So in this budget, we literally held $2.6 million that normally would have been ongoing revenue and held it as one time because that's what the math was telling us. But what we don't know is what's going to happen in the reappraisal cycle. Our gut's telling us is that we won't fully recover that on the property tax, but we'll have to wait and see. When we look at our sales tax and our use tax numbers, use tax is notoriously volatile. Sales tax was not much different this year, although we happened to have a really good December, which helped us. But what we don't know is how are all of these things at the micro level going to start influencing what's happening at the macro level and what that's going to do in terms of our funding sources. It is highly possible. During last year's budget, there was a point early in the process where we weren't sure we were going to be able to give salary increases. And we had to work really hard to try to balance issues. But outside of salary increases for staff and what we call level 1 expenses, which is must pay bills, that's all we were able to fund. And folks go, well, why'd you give salary increases? Well, we're still in a hyper-competitive environment for people. And, where some areas were seeing relief, other areas were not. And so if we didn't do that, that would just exacerbate the problem that we're dealing with and create other issues. I'm fully anticipating the same thing's going to play in this year's budget. We had some tailwinds. Costco was a significant tailwind for us. Without Costco, I will tell you the budget would have been much worse. And so that was really important for two reasons. One, it brought additional revenue into the community. Two, had it have located at the other location they were considering, it actually would have pulled business and revenue out of our community. And we can say that now because what we're starting to see is that and this is a tailwind that I hope continues, is that it's starting to reshape the retail trade area. And you're seeing new businesses come into our community that I can clearly say would not have come into Longmont but for Costco. So I've talked to the In-N-Out folks, but for Costco, they're not here. If you look at Harvest Junction, we're starting to see some clothing retail come in. I was driving through and I saw a Carter's baby store, not that it applies to me these days, but I'm like, wow, that's kind of what's happening. And then there's a sports store next to it, and then Nordstrom's Rack is coming in. And so we're seeing it start to reshape some things, and we're seeing other opportunities that we hope we continue to develop. The question then now is, what are all these tariff conversations going to do to potential development? What's it going to do to housing costs? Because what we've seen over the last 5 years as we were going through COVID, you would see people planning things, but then when interest rates spiked, when cost of materials spiked, they just shuttered it and said, we're going to wait this out. And so we're going to have to be really careful with that as we're looking to the future. And I think what I'm talking to staff about is we're in a paradigm shift. Prepare for it. Identify what the issues are. And we need to start building options in terms of how we're going to respond to it, and to what level we can respond to it, and start pulling information together. So to your point, when we talk to council about budget issues and these things, we're not coming with, oh, woe is me, here's the problem, we're losing this funding. We're coming with solutions, understanding that the solutions will be limited. Because when you think about the food security piece, let's theoretically add that all of a sudden, I'm thinking about some numbers. This year, let's say I have a shortfall in voucher funding of $175,000. Decisions could be pretty significant. Next year, the shortfall could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000. So now you're talking to people when you're thinking about food insecurity issues, and now we're talking about how we deal with this gap. And do you do it across the board where you reduce it incrementally across the board on the voucher? Do you target it in this? But now we're adding another problem without a revenue source to fill it. And when you think about what the county's going through, we've seen it in our health and human service funding this year, is a lot of things that, where the county was talking about reduced funding, that was actually related to state funding that the county was utilizing that was connected to the federal funding that the state was getting. And so now you're starting to see the snowball effect. And so that's doom and gloom, right? It's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I say all of that because I also want to manage expectations in terms of what we're really going to be able to do in the budget process or what that's going to look like. But I do think there's ways for us to solve through this. We're just going to have to be really tactical when we're looking at things. And I do think that how we approach this, not as the city, but really as the community and how do we start looking at these issues is going to be even more important today than it's really ever been because of the constriction on the different types of sources of revenue that we've been able to historically use. Now I say that and it could change tomorrow and it could be better than we even thought because that's unfortunately the world that we're in. If you think about the tariff conversation, they imposed the tariffs on Tuesday. Canada, Mexico, China, they lashed back on the tariffs. At some point last night I heard, oh, we're going to have an economic deal. But then I was looking at some news and Canada's pulling all of the whiskey made in the United States off their shelves. And then Canada's saying, we're going to cut off our oil supply to you. And Canada's saying, we're going to cut off our electric that we're supplying to the Northeast. That just jacks cost. I do think they're probably going to have a deal because the pain's going to be real and it's just going to take time, but we just don't know. So part of, in my mind, and what I'm talking to staff about is embrace the chaos, be creative, and be ready to move on a dime in a hurry in terms of what we're looking at. So things that we've done in transportation, when the first piece came out about the reducing of the funds, I asked staff, give me a list of all the transportation projects that have federal funding in it. And I want to know what projects have started, where the spending's occurred, what projects haven't started. And so we've got it tiered that Kaufman Street, you heard somebody talking about that. We're in the middle of it. So it's tiered that we have to ensure that we can finish what we started. And so we're delaying certain things so that if we lose the funding, I can shift the local funding into the funding in projects that have already started so we can finish it. The two areas that were the most concerning to me were health and human service, the areas that you all talked about, and transportation. In housing, and housing is more from the housing authority side. CDBG has always been a concern. With Karen here, I think we've seen the ebbs and flows, but the housing authority side is where I was the most concerned because of the voucher funding. And transportation. Everywhere else in the organization, I think we can tend to manage it, but those were two big areas. So that's kind of what we're trying to deal with, and I wish I had more certainty for you all don't. And we've been talking about with the council. I will say that while food security, and Carmen's probably going to yell at me too, but I'm used to that, is an issue that while it's not specifically called out in this high level, it is something that has been, and that's why you're seeing all of these other programs, that's something that's been at the forefront, and, you know, commend Christina, Ronnie, even Karen when she was here and stuff that we were doing to do this. It's been something that has been a focus.
Right.
I think we're going to need community support and other support, but in all of this, we're also seeing donations to many of the nonprofits that are beside us supporting issues going down too because of the economic pressures. So, all that being said, it seems like doom and gloom. I think rationally you could say it is. I also want to focus on what are our best hopes. And I think when we think about that, I think Longmont is well positioned in many different ways to locally create some tailwinds that'll help us weather some of these storms. and it's talked a little bit about the retail. I talked about if you look at economic development, we just had one where there's a battery production that's expanding here in Longmont. There's a couple of more projects that hopefully we'll act on soon. That's a tailwind to our economic base. And so those types of things with expanded retail, that starts pushing up, hopefully, our budget projections for next year. So when we looked at our health and human service funding, the council directed us 5 or 6 years where we moved from 2% to 3% of the total revenues in the general fund. So there's a natural growth factor that'll come into play if we can see our property tax base increase and we can see our sales and use tax increase. So you're seeing in the macroeconomic level how all of these things start touching each other. So I think Longmont, compared to other communities, is well positioned for this. The other thing that we learned is during COVID, we're also well positioned, whether you like big box retail or not. I will tell you that big box retail was the reason that we didn't have a financial situation in COVID, and Boulder got obliterated. And so we're diverse enough as a local economy that I think that could be a tailwind in these conditions. So the optimist in me is saying we can do things. It's going to be slower than I think any of us want it to be. But I think what we got to get focused on is not taking a step back. And that's got to be front and center for us. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Literally, this has been changing in my mind as I started thinking about this last week. And every time I turn on the news, it's just, this is evolving. And probably the next time I talk to the next board, it'll evolve again because something's going to change.
Thank you for that.
So now, what do you all want me to talk about?
I have a question about Coffin.
Mm-hmm.
So if I heard you right, we have the funds to finish the Coffin project, correct? Does that include the transit hub down between First and Boston?
We have some of the funding on that, and so that's actually, I think we have about $15 million from RTD. That RTD is actually transferred into an escrow account, and so we have that money in hand. We've been putting money in and acquiring property. So we're currently, I think we have to close on the last parcel of property, and we're in the process of exploring public-private partnerships and then just how we're going to approach development and handle stormwater and water quality so we can look at that. We're under contract with RTD to have that First and Main Transit facility finished by the end of 2027. So we have to get it done. But there's not really any federal funds in that. Where the federal funds really sit is actually in the Kaufman Street project. But again, that was so far down the road and contracted, and we're already drawing out of it, that we have seen that sort of be secured either via the courts or even Congress kind of coming in and saying you can't change a congressional decision. And so it's really the other projects that we haven't started. And actually, I think we scrambled in with the last project, so they gave you that deadline of like Tuesday at 3 p.m. We jammed the last project we had with federal funds in. So technically, we met all the deadlines, but we just don't know what they're going to do.
Okay.
Transportation is an interesting one. We talked about last night. So how many of you all have used Ride Longmont? If you haven't used Ride Longmont, it's a really cool service. The performance of Ride Longmont right now has already, based on the numbers I heard last night, potentially surpassed the ridership of the bus system. And it's continuing to grow. These are the things. How do you control your destiny? How do you do these things? When you look at a cost per rider and things like that, the numbers are really good on Ride Longmont. as we continue to see that evolve and we have a more stable data set, and we talked about this with council, is we need to be careful about looking at our TMP and being too prescriptive, because it's possible that what happens with Ride Longmont is that becomes actually so successful that it starts supplanting some of the bus routes so that we can get more targeted in terms of the bus routes that we have and become really more cost effective to deal with these issues. But I would say especially, we have kids using it to get to school. I think we're seeing our population of older adults really starting to utilize it. And so I think as we think about transportation and food security and access, I think there's a piece with Ride Longmont in terms of how we can approach it and how we can look at marketing, assisting, and doing the things to increase ridership on that, because my mom's 93. 2 years ago, I finally got her to get a smartphone, and I narrowed it to 3 buttons. She could not use an app that Ride Longmont uses to get a ride. I think, that's an interesting piece in partnership of how do we do training and technical programs so that we get folks to use it, because when you look at the expense of owning the vehicle and all of these other pieces, that is a tailwind for someone as an individual, that if you're not in the same point where you used to be, where it's like, oh no, how am I going to get there? And part of what we've done with Ride Longmont is we've also built the contract where it can be piggybacked. So we're talking to Berthoud, we're talking to Erie, we're talking to Boulder County, all about Ride Longmont. I think some are getting ready to take action on it, which all of a sudden, you take this Ride Longmont concept that becomes more of a web across the Front Range, which also adjusts transportation access, where if you're looking at disposable income, if I had a system like that and I didn't have to go to work and travel all over the place, I would sell one of our cars. For me, time's the driver is why I'm not, but that may be something you think about. That then starts connecting to access to food and some of the other issues. And because we're still embedded in the contract, we can talk about those issues. Or Arlene did something with the Housing Authority when we were in there about how do we partner with VIA, where we have congregate living facilities and we're getting folks different options. I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow on a different issue, but let's get creative in how we see transportation and how we see transportation touching these areas that you're bringing up. Sorry, I went on a tangent, but that was fresh in my mind. Anything else you want to know about? Don't be shy.
When you spoke to us the last time at Village on Main, you gave some good information about housing and how what's looking like in the next 5 years. Mostly that it was eventually going to be paying for itself.
Housing.
The development and the new buildings going up, something along the line of if you got 2 more developments or in that area.
Are you talking about the Housing Authority piece?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so
I didn't want to start paraphrasing it because I didn't
Yeah,
want to
so-
give wrong information.
again, another thing where there's uncertainty. So when we were looking at our Housing Authority and we were looking at our budget, one of the things that we found is that from a cash flow perspective, it was heading the wrong direction. And I don't know, Karen, would you say heading to insolvency? I mean, I think that's a fair assumption of that.
It was in crisis.
It was in crisis. So development was a big piece of that. And so we've we had a lot of public-private partnerships on development, which has really shifted the fund balance to, I think at that time we were around $1 million fund balance. We're now at close to $3.6 million fund balance. Clearly knowing the way that budget has been designed is that you have to be really tactical in when you're developing projects to make sure that you're managing your fund balance over time. So right now we have we just did the groundbreaking on Zinnia, Ascend on Hover, which is an affordable family project with early childhood education. It's going to be 1, 2, and 3, 4 bedrooms. Is under construction. Has project-based vouchers in it. So how the whole HUD funding and the project-based vouchers based on how you financed a project 3 years ago under construction is something that we need to look at. So the point of that is the world's changed. And so how do you look at the next couple of projects in terms of that self-sufficiency and what that looks like? Also knowing within that world, the way the budget's created is that each property is its own budget. And what you're trying to do is to secure the budget of the general fund so you have some capacity. I think that there's still a way to do it, but I think the way we're going to have to do it is to build a multi-income project. And this is how some of the more successful housing authorities do it, where it's not just an affordable project, it's an affordable, attainable, and it's a market rate project. Because what they do is they diversify their revenue streams within the overall project so that your cash flows look different. Boulder Housing Partners actually does it. And so we're starting to think through the fact that, and we do know you can combine financing through LIHTC, which is a state program, which we're not worried about. But instead of relying on project-based vouchers to kind of fill the financial gap, maybe you rely on income restricted attainable or attainable and or non-income restricted attainable to kind of offset the impact of the vouchers that you're going to look at. And we've run some pro formas, and I really think that's the road we're going to have to go down, because it takes the uncertainty of the federal government out of play, but it lets you build your financials so you could build certainty back into the system. But we're going to have to flex a little bit.
So, my understanding is that it's Willoughby, isn't it, over there in Boulder County, that is the housing for sale and affordable, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not talking about that type of project. And so, like when Boulder Housing Partners builds, or I'm just going to use them, they may have 50% of it is an affordable project, and you may have some parts that's an attainable and some parts of market rate.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing is you're actually using your attainable and market rate because you have more revenue potential to offset the financials on that. And so it's inherently a mixed income project, but you're offsetting your expenses on one side with the market on this side. And I just think, because traditionally the way the gap's been filled is you put in project-based vouchers.
That's questionable, yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, it's highly it's, I wish I could say more, I just don't. I'm going to get briefed in like the next hour or two on this one. Any other questions?
I do have another one, which is kind of, off the wall, I guess. You didn't mention public safety, and I kind of am assuming that that's going to be okay. Do you anticipate that, based on, of course, where the things are going with the federal and just getting rid of people, do you anticipate that you are going to have to do any reduction in force?
So actually in the last budget, because of sales tax, we actually had to, we reduced in the public safety fund 6 positions, and we moved 3 positions into the general fund. So we have the transportation fund, the public safety fund, the open space fund that are sales tax dependent. And so that revenue stream is generated via sales tax. So when you see the sales tax dip, when you have balkanized taxes like that, in the general fund you can balance it with property tax and other revenue streams. In those funds that are very specific into sales tax, there's not another option other than balancing it within the general fund, but you still have the general fund issues to deal with. And so we did that. we're going to reevaluate. We're reevaluating right now to see where we sit and how we ended the year and what the expenses really look like. So our hope is that we can refill those positions, but I can't answer that question now because it depends. And honestly, and you're going to hate to hear this, part of the reason the sales tax has actually been performing well is when you look at inflation. And you think about inflation on items that you buy at a grocery store. So while discretionary spending may be dropping, as the price of a steak or something goes up, you're generating more sales tax on it. So it's kind of balancing the system, but we're starting to see that shift a little bit. So, I don't know. I'm hoping not. And I think there's enough new retail coming in that I think it'll balance it out. But it depends. When's In-N-Out going to open? I mean, honestly, you joke about it, but, and I can't give you the numbers, they generate a lot of tax revenue. And they generate a lot of ancillary tax revenue because everybody that travels to go eat at an In-N-Out. When's Nordstrom Rack going to open? And so those are things I don't know, but it could head the other way.
So, two things. One is just planting a seed. So several of us are here from the Friends of the Longmont Senior Center. So we are certainly looking at ways that we can help support Longmont Senior Services. And so I just want to plant the seed with you to keep that in mind. So we're looking at a longer term plan and strategic investments and what would be the best partnership that we could have with the city around meeting the needs of older adults. So please, it's just a seed plant, and we'll follow up. We'll be following up. I think the other thing that is a challenge is certainly about embrace the chaos. And so I think certainly what you're hearing from the advisory board is that every day we work with older adults and other folks in human services that are totally struggling with all this. And so, I think the comment or request is how do we elevate that in an environment that is really uncertain, because staff sees it every day. And, I think we are looking for staff is, and the advisory boards, we're just looking for how to best elevate that need in a way that is helpful. So just comments. And
so when I say embrace the chaos, I'm saying staff.
Right.
But to bring calm to those that are living it. And I think this is a good way to elevate it because as I'm to the point, as I'm starting to think through this, the things that you are talking about are inherently core functions of the city.
They are totally, yes.
And they're core functions of the city, and our core responsibility is to take care of the people in our community when they're struggling. And that's where I'm saying there are going to be some hard decisions when we look at what the chaos is creating and where people are struggling and decisions that we have to make. And really, in my mind, I'm fully preparing myself for that to go. I think we even need to get beyond just what we add funding to. We need to look at what we're funding and determine, is this more important or is this more important? And I think by you all elevating this and having the conversation with council, that helps me get some perspective and bring some perspective as we start heading into those decision points. Because I think we're going to have to revisit what we're doing and making sure that we're taking care of the people in our community. And there's going to be some hard conversations. But and everything we're doing is important. That's the other piece. When I look at everything we're doing, I can't go, oh, here's fluff. Because much of it is core. We're from a staffing perspective, the leanest city that you will probably find of this size across the Front Range. And we provide more than most of the other cities that are similar to us. So we used to talk about when we go into budget cuts, it was easy for folks to go, oh, I'm going to cut 10 positions because they're overstaffed. And that's not the situation that we have. And so we're going to have to get focused and ask the hard questions. And those are things I'm starting to pull together in my mind as we go in May and talk to the council about the budget.
Harold, one of the John presented the model where it kind of looks at everything that is going on with regards to food security. One of those opportunities, just to put kind of on your radar, is, to your point, how we're funding human services and what that looks like. And so we actually will have, Alberto will have a presentation coming up. So just to kind of tuck that in there to see how that fits.
That's what I was channeling in.
Absolutely.
When you're in this period.
Yep.
Here's what we've been doing. Here are the conditions today. Do we need to reframe it based on today? And it may be a pause and say we're reframing right now because of the conditions and we want to get back to this. But I think those are the kind of conversations we need to have. I also would say I liked your approach about touching it to children, youth, and family services, because if we have this group doing this, and this group doing this, and this group doing this, and it's all the same, how do we build economy of scale and saying, how do we approach it from a systems thinking perspective? So how do we start bringing things together in different ways?
We started looking at the senior population and the children, youth, and family. It's about 60% of our population is that age group. And so being able to identify some of the needs that we share. And Longmont has always been responsive, especially to vulnerable communities. And I would expect it will continue as best it can.
So one area where we could use some help, and we know this from the Housing Authority side, is Nextlight has a lot of really good programs in terms of broadband connections, internet connections. We also know in our data set that a lot of people are challenged. Part of why a lot of people are staying with other services is because it's easier to use, but it's more expensive. So what we've done in our Housing Authority properties is we do things like bulk agreements, income agreements. And so if you can save someone $50 a month, then that's $50 a month they can use. And I think some of the bridge where you all have helped is actually how do we teach people to use over-the-top services. But, when we get into neighborhoods, I think there's a role where Nextlight can play in terms of a marketing component. And, how do we partner with you, Children, Youth, and Family Services, which they've been doing a good job of really kind of going out and talking to people about connecting to Nextlight. But how do they sponsor a program to put money into food security based on working with you all to get access to those customers? They can do that. They work in that more private model where we can do things. Those are things I'm starting to think about. So I think there's options. We just need to get creative on them.
Well, John's part of the Neighborhood Group Leadership Association, so there's that available as a marketing or at least a contact point for seniors.
So I think one of the things about this is just an awareness to the council of, what we're seeing, particularly since I have really only heard one council member ever bring up the fact that we need to take a look at seniors, okay? So we have maps, the city has maps that show where the concentration of seniors are, and I think to them, it would be kind of nice for them to see, oh my gosh, this is my area. I've got 25% seniors in here. So that's one of the things that we really are interested in showing them is this is what's going on, and this is not going to go away. So it's awareness. The other thing is, I go with the seniors when they do their shopping, and it's true. They are going to buy TV dinners before they're going to buy something that's nutritious, and that's because you can probably get a TV dinner for 99 cents. I'm not going to say anything to them because that's exactly what, and they've reached the magic age of probably 80 or 90 at this point on that. So I don't know how we can say to them, you know, it'd be nice if you could have a more nutritious meal when they really can't afford it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot out there, but awareness is really what we want to say to them. There's one of you that's talked about it. There's 7 of you.
And I think it's great. I mean, I think you need to do that and bring this forward. I think they're expecting that.
Carolyn, real quick, were you at the retreat, I guess, they had off on Market Street? I wasn't there, but is there anything that stuck out from the various discussions that kind of were top of mind for you?
Well, they're staying pretty consistent. When they talk about housing, I think they are, you know, they did talk about housing that, not necessarily age-restricted housing, but housing that is conducive to people downsizing and really being for older adults in other areas that want to downsize, but not being age-restricted to where it's. So that was kind of the housing conversation that they talked about, but you know, they really didn't deviate from what was the existing workload. And I think part of that is just because as we move into November, there's a couple that are termed out, and other things that's coming into place. I think they wanted to just stay focused on that, but they did get into that conversation about housing for older adults and you know, being able to downsize. If you haven't seen, and I don't know if it's online, I would suggest looking at the presentation at the LADP meeting from the state demographer, because there were some interesting things coming out of this when you look to 2050. So you're correct. As we're moving toward 2050, the older adult population's growing, but as you get close to 2050, it starts sliding down as the percentage of population. And what's interesting, and I had no clue about this, the age of fertility was something that came up. So traditionally it's been in the 20s and it moved up. Now it's in the 30s. So what you're seeing in this, you know, demographic trend is there's a thing happening around 2040 to 2050 where the population starts reversing itself, because millennials and Gen Z, I'm a Gen Xer. There's not a lot of us, and we didn't have a lot of babies. But millennials and Gen Z are starting to buck what we were seeing as a trend, because they're having babies later. And if you have been at City Hall or in our organization, they are proving that trend out, because we have a lot of folks that are having babies, but they're not in their 20s, they're in their 30s. So there's a piece of this that we have to watch also when we think about the housing, because you want to build multi-use housing so it lasts over time and can transition. And I think that was part of the True North project that we're building is, you know, if you're retired in Longmont, you qualify for it, is giving people a chance to try to, if they income qualify and they're in a house that's too big for them now, that they can get an affordable or attainable house, because that also helps the housing market, because you start cycling through homes. And we're thinking about more projects like that.
I live with my youngest daughter and son-in-law. It took us 6 months to find a house that would accommodate me and my children. My children are not going to have any children, for whatever reasons. They are already starting, they're millennials at the very front end of the millennial thing. And at the very start of me coming to the senior center to join the board and all that sort of thing, they started talking to me about housing for when I'm gone, and they're not going to have children to support them or help them or whatever. So they're starting to network with friends. So these are 40-something kids, kids, they're not kids anymore. They're full-grown adults, but they're still my children. And they're starting to talk about trying to form not group housing, but housing in a compound situation where they have places to socialize, and maybe smaller kitchens and maybe larger community sort of areas. And they plan to stay here. They don't plan to leave Longmont. But they're already starting to think that way, and they're not seeing anything like that being built at this point in time. That's not to say that it won't be built, but that is another creative area to start looking at, because there are a lot of these 40-something millennials who are not having children, but they want to be together to support each other as they start aging into senior center activities and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think there's a co-op housing near us. Arlene and I live in the same area. I think they tried to get at that.
Uh-huh.
I don't know
They
how many
didn't
people
get
have
it.
moved in. I don't think it's full.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the hard part of that is it's
Mhm.
almost like the market and the demand has to be there for them
Of course.
based on the financing piece of this. And
The model that they've looked at are some housing that I think has been built in Canada, in Vancouver, in which each person owns their own facility, but yet it's got a I don't know what to call a roof that connects all the different living areas so that the central area is covered. Of course, with Vancouver, you'd want something, otherwise you can't get out sometimes in the year. And that central area becomes the community. You can actually grow a garden and all kinds of.
I've actually seen some people. I've actually had conversations with folks that were interested in that, and you may hear council talk about this a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Part of the headwind is how does construction defects legislation tie into this?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's oddly problematic when it's connected by a single roof
Mm-hmm.
and the litigation that's associated with it. And nobody's had a great legislative solution to it, but it's kind of a condo-ish
Kind of a condo-ish.
concept.
Yeah, it's a little of this, a little of that.
Yeah. And we think we have the last series of condos being built in Longmont until there's a change. So the ones off of 119 by UC Health.
Mm-hmm.
We're just starting to, the insurance market's oddly starting to shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, so in the True North project, you even have the same issue with townhomes, quadplexes, and sixplexes.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is you're managing the insurance requirement on scale versus it being 100 units within this massive complex that you get just enough people and then you file a lawsuit. You're restricting the potential liability to a smaller group.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance cost on the first 55 units to manage construction defects was $600,000. And so.
And that's an issue you can't resolve directly. So,
No, I mean, it's even the point, insurance companies, construction companies, they're literally writing contracts saying it can't be for sale because of the liability. Hawaii is actually a really good test case of this. Part of Hawaii's issues are actually very similar in where they're at now. And so, now, I am not advocating for no coverage for individuals. I just think, I wish somebody would we've tried to talk to them about drafting legislation that says, look, if the housing authority builds or the city a for sale product, if you have a problem, give us a chance to fix it. If we don't fix it, give us another chance to fix it. Now, at a certain point, it is what it is, and you need to go down that defect run. Or if we refuse to fix it, sue us. Because we refuse, but there's got to be a way, because what's happening is they're holding until the very end, and then they're filing, and there's never really a chance to fix it. And I think that's, and if they were here, I would say it, I think that's driven by trial attorneys in terms of how this is approached.
It does seem to me that Longmont, as creative as the people are here, that this is a great place for innovation in all sorts of things, community,
Right.
housing, all of that. And we can set a marker.
Well, and we have people in our community that are philanthropic. You know, I can clearly tell you that, but for the Golden family selling us 9 acres for $3.65 a square foot, and another 7 acres for $10 a square foot. I think market rate per square foot is at least $23 a square foot. So scale, True North never happens. And we have people that have property that are philanthropic, that are interested in finding solutions and partnerships. And I think as we think through this, to the point that Karen brought up earlier, is, well, how does the Friends play? How does Senior Center play when we're now starting to think of developments, and how do we think about what they did in Prairie Village with Spring Creek and Fall River, and how do we, as we're looking at things, try to integrate it within developments, but we bring all of these groups together to, if I could wave a magic wand, I would build old housing for older adults, family housing, kind of what we're doing at Ascent. How do you build a daycare component in there where then you can partner with the people that are living in the housing for older adults to help offset some of these expenses? How do you explore friends and family components in terms of childcare when there's an emergency? Because then the community supporting each other. I grew up in a small town. There's a lot of lessons from small communities in my mind that we could take. I can't get my mom to move with me. She's 93 and she drives, and I routinely have to call her because my cousins are like, she's on a ladder. My aunt's 90, she has health insurance. She has health issues. That's why I'm going back more. Why will they not move? Can you guess?
Community.
It's the community and the support system. And so in some ways I'm incredibly lucky because they live in a small community and they probably have better support than if they lived with me. But small town America's figured this out. They do that for kids, they do this. It's not political, it's not anything. It's we're here, we're supporting each other. And I think we devalue systems that small communities have built. And I think the question for us is, in times like this, how do we learn from where Karen grew up, where Christina grew up, where I grew up? And how do we build those values into the neighborhoods within our community? Because there's a lot of people that I think would do this. I just think as communities get larger, we get disconnected from this. And I think if there's one thing we could all collectively work on with Children, Youth, and Family Services, Community and Neighborhood Services, Senior Services, with our cultural brokers, is how do we try to build that type of small town community structure within multiple neighborhoods so we can support each other during these difficult times. And now I'm on my personal tangent. But I've just learned a lot from my mom. I mean, she will not move. Even to the point she told me, if you move me, you will kill me. Because she loses her support structure.
You know, families enjoy being together.
Right.
Really, la comadre, la tía, whatever. I know I got you, and that's what they need. With you, it's just you go about your life, just left alone. She needs, activities so she can stay active around the surrounding. That's important to the individual.
And maybe to the point you're all bringing up, how do we elevate this to council? How do we take the systems thinking that you're touching on, and how are we now intentional of bringing youth services, neighborhood services, health and human service funding, our cultural brokers, and maybe we just collectively take this on to go, okay, let's build a new model. The staff, everybody I've worked with since I've been here is great at, all right, if we're going to have this to deal with, how do we do it on our own? And how do we try to build a new model that we can then start replicating within the community?
Another model is I have several friends who their children live far away and they don't want to move here. And so they have invited a roommate in or a family, mother, child. And then when they pass away, that mother and child get that house is how they're doing it. And that's really working for the 3 people who have done that.
Here's something else that's coming that I should have mentioned earlier. And I'm going to actually bring Karen and Christina into this conversation. So about 5 years ago, we realized that we were really struggling internally as an organization in understanding how we're supporting individuals because we didn't know who was touching whom. And I had this crazy idea of how do we have enabling, caring communities and how we do this. The problem was no one was doing it. So we started working with UC Health and we started this design process. And it's like we could never cross that hump. Well, Karen may not know this, but all that work actually has now paid off because in the time we were...
Really?
Yeah.
Alberto is... Sorry.
So all the work we did in the time, what happened is all of a sudden Salesforce accelerates. So then we took all of this work within a Salesforce platform that in about 4 weeks, we're going to start operationalizing it and beta testing it and we're probably going to start with the housing authority, where internally, if there's a senior services client that police deals with, they're going to be able to go into the system and it'll say Christina Pacheco, and there's requirements in terms of who can see what. It's not open. And they may just go, call Christina if I'm the one that they're dealing with. And so instead of taking a public safety approach, we're breaking the human intelligence barrier to do this. The other step in this is they're also transitioning their case management systems because this is all in one. I mean, that's how fast Salesforce moved to where their case management systems are in this, so it saves us money. So then those that can see information can see it. And then the next phase of the beta test that we're going to go in on our housing authority properties is have people be able to come in and give us waivers so that we can share information, so that we can do welfare checks, so that we can do all of these things because there's a gap in the system. Because if we don't have those waivers and somebody's like, we want to do a welfare check, the courts have pretty much limited what we can do. So we're going to start testing this model. And then the evolution of this model ties into what all of you have brought up in terms of how do we support the person to the best of our ability, that I think then ties into this question of how do we work as neighborhoods and groups, because then you can put your caregiver. You can actually put your primary and your secondary caregiver, and I think the way they're eventually structuring it is if I'm a caregiver and I'm going on vacation, I can go, I'm on vacation, reach me at this number, or I'm on vacation, please reach out to this caregiver. Now that piece we're still developing, but the end result is to utilize software to bridge the gap, and I think we thought we were never going to get there, but we're finally there, and I think that then enables what we just talked about, because then the neighborhoods can support each other.
I assume you're using AI for some of this? Not yet?
AI,
It's not quite there.
it's not AI in the sense of it's not predictive.
Mhm.
It's more, I would
Support.
say, a light version of AI in that it's connecting,
Mhm.
Connections, yeah.
but it's not AI. Now, there is an AI platform. I mean, like, I've thought about if my mom would ever get internet. There are systems where I could put a system in her house with cameras
Mhm.
that if she were to fall, it would trigger and do this, but that's like,
Yeah, it's not gonna happen.
you have a sense of what my mom's probably like, right?
That's not gonna
Having
happen.
cameras for my mom.
Yeah, good luck.
No.
Good luck.
No, it's not.
But, I mean, so there's points where then,
Mhm.
depending on the situation, and I just tell her I just want it outside because my aunt notoriously falls outside and then rolls till she can get herself up.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
so that's a space that's dangerous to me. But
That'll change. I think that will change as
right.
the Xers and the millennials start aging into the elder population,
Mm-hmm.
because people are much more used to having technology supporting them or
Right.
surrounding them, and that's right. And it'll improve too. That's it. AI right now, I don't think it's.
So probably in about 2 months, we're gonna have I want to have a special presentation with the friends group, with this group, in terms of what we're doing and because I mean that's game changing
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what we can do. So when we talk about being creative, let's figure out a way to get creative and let's bring all the groups together and let's build a different model for our community, and then work with NGLA to figure out where can we test it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Arlene and I can figure out a way to get our neighborhood to test it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it makes sense because we have market rate apartments, we have affordable apartments, we have single family homes, we have rental homes. I think our neighborhood would be a great beta site.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we take a newer neighborhood, an older neighborhood, we take a diverse neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
Interchange and learn from each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I wish I had the time to fully engage. I don't, but I think now I'm looking at the friends, and now I'm looking at this group is how can we come together to do something
Amazing.
amazing. I mean, how to, to quote Steve Jobs, how do you make a ding in the universe?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a real opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, even in this chaotic crisis situation that we find ourselves in nationally, but as a community to grow together and to be really creative, innovative in our approach to helping each other.
And maybe it'll make people nicer. I'm not joking. Right now,
Fear is a huge thing.
yeah, right now I can't think of an area in our organization where we're not dealing with significant issues related to how people treat each other. And it's probably the saddest thing that I've seen in my career because when I started my career, that was not the case. And maybe this is a way that we can combat it.
You see that at grocery stores and every place, people are just flat out rude. Yeah, and they don't need to be.
Costco, they're not.
That's because they give free goods.
We need more free goods.
I think everybody's just so happy that we have a Costco and they
Yeah, I
don't
think
have
they
to
are.
drive forever that,
Oh, yeah.
Wait till In-N-Out gets here. Even happier people.
yeah, now wait till the traffic happens with In-N-Out at Costco.
One thing at a time. Any other questions, comments for Harold?
I have one more, just kind of a question, comment type of thing. Since we're in a kind of a creative mode here, talking about the food insecurity, which I think is critical that we help address all of that for many reasons. I'm new to this, so I'm asking, and it may be that you've got a handle on it and it's going great. I just don't know. I'm ignorant. So, but with places like Costco and Safeway and King Soopers and Vitamin Cottage and all of those places who handle fresh produce and stuff like that, and we have farmers market, and we have some of the local farmsteads and things like that, about gathering that food that is gonna go into the trash, into our dump, and being able to process it into something that is nutritious for people. It doesn't even have to be older adults as far as that goes. It could go to the general community. I know, I don't think there's anything, what I wrote down was, a world kitchen type of situation in which the food is processed into meals and which people can then purchase for a very low cost or at no cost at all. And it's different than the Meals on Wheels. I don't see it as being Meals on Wheels, but something else. And it keeps stuff out of our dump, first of all, and it recycles. I'm not meaning it negatively. It makes sure that people get benefit of fresh vegetables, fresh produce, fresh meat, even, and stuff like that. Is there any conversation? Is anybody aware of anything that's going on in the surrounding vicinity?
Well, I think they're, go ahead.
So one of the boxes on the model that John talked about talks about an RFP that Children, Youth, and Family has. It came out really blurry. It's the green box under the middle yellow one. And so what they are doing is actually they have an RFP out, and Hilda has worked with Ronnie because of the expanded hours at the senior center. There is a need to provide that food, and
For
so
meals,
yes, so in conversation with Hilda and Ronnie, and then talking to John about this work, one of the things that they are looking at that would potentially benefit the senior center as well to leverage the dollars that Children, Youth, and Families has is to contract with a restaurant, food truck, something along those lines of that business model to provide the proteins, and then looking at the possibility of a kitchen somewhere where that exactly could happen. So probably not as developed as the idea that you have, but it's kind of in the works. And that idea really came from looking at department-wide what is happening and how we can leverage that. We also know that in our housing and community wellness programs, where we have our clinicians, there is some food security issues just with regards to transportation and how people get connected, and so they're working as well to kind of be a part of this model.
Okay.
And I think some of the businesses do donate food, but the large corporations are different.
Yes,
I know. Yeah.
And what I don't know is I have a friend that's in education that they get federal funding for food, but there's a weird rule with the federal funding where that if they have apples and I give you an apple and you don't eat it, they have to throw it away. And he was really frustrated with that. So I think it depends on
Have to do some mindset change.
right, and I think there's some things in there that it's just so nuanced, and so the answer is I don't know, but I think you're seeing that some do, some don't.
Hilda's been researching this. It's CACFP, Child and Children Adult Food Program, basically that covers seniors and children, and so she's looking at what those policies look like at the state and how we may be able to work with them.
And Longmont Food Rescue, that's still
Yes.
So there's some
Home Rescue, they're the ones that will even come and get stuff from your garden.
So I don't want to derail the meeting, but there are options.
And they are part of that
Now,
bigger
and
When you
here's
said food truck, I just had this epiphany about a food truck driving through a neighborhood. And
That's
the
exactly
kitchen's right there, the food, the prep, and all that.
That's
So
been done.
exactly what Hilda's talking
And here's an interesting piece to and I'm glad you brought it up. And here's how I know this, not because so I work out at a gym called Train Station. And one of their models is they have a food truck there, and they actually prepare meals for workouts and things like that, and you can buy 4, you can do whatever. But in talking to the guy, one of the challenges in the food truck world is that you have to have a commissary. And the commissary is actually what is required under the health permitting process. And so a lot of them are creating partnerships with restaurants and things like that in order to meet that requirement. You know, again, being creative in what I just heard is there a point where it may make sense to figure out a way to fund a large-scale commissary that you let the food trucks utilize, but maybe you don't charge them a cost for utilizing the commissary, but what they do in return for the cost of the commissary is that they agree to or to provide, to do what you're talking about, is provide X number of meals or do something to do it. And I don't know if it'll work or not, but it just, when you said it, it hit me that I know there's a challenge in that world here.
Right.
And that's, again, the public-private, and it may be public-private-private or public, nonprofit, private. That's the creativity that I think we have to bring to the table to find alternative solutions to utilize many different means to a common end.
You know, that's very important here, talk about some working with the food vendor, Cinco de Mayo. I do 25 food vendors, then I do again for the Day of the Dead. Food vendors or hot dogs. Some of them are wanting or starting to have their food truck, but given a commissary kitchen where they're, I guess some of them are able to do it as a restaurant, whatever. But that's a great. We need it.
We do.
That would be really great for the food vendors, and they would be always in compliance. You know, the health department, which is very, very, very important. Some of them like that is there, they search on, and it's pretty expensive. Where they're going. It's ridiculous. You know, food's going up. The rental where they have to park themselves or the event is expensive. So it's really hard. So
My nephew has a
big kitchen, a commissary kitchen that would be a valuable big business, and not charging too much, but to provide some meals to the community that would help. That would be great.
My nephew lives in San Diego and has a food truck, and they have a commissary kitchen, and he couldn't survive without it.
It's needed. It's crucial.
Up until about 5 years ago, a friend of mine had a food truck, and he used the FAA kitchen up on 17th Street. He was able to use their kitchen and make all his stuff. Eventually, they hired him there to run it. So he gave up the food truck. But that was his saving grace, was having that kitchen there and being able to use it. He was able to use it for other things sometimes, and it just worked out so great. And they don't use it a lot, you know, I mean, they have times where they're not using it. So they could schedule it very well that he could use it in times when it was free and or available. And it worked out perfect.
Yeah, and I think economically I could make the argument, I mean, if we could get the right partners.
There's a lot of stuff empty.
Right, if you can get the right partners to do something like that, I think there's a broader economic argument that you could make, in the sense that then do you create a situation where Longmont becomes
Like Portland.
a food truck kind of mecca, because there is a tourist component to that, based on what we already have with our local breweries and distilleries and things like that. Now, obviously, there will be pushback from restaurants. Just understand that. But is it another way to diversify our local economy from a sales tax perspective, where then everything we talked about revenue, this is a tailwind now into revenue? And I think it has to be done in conjunction. At some point, we're going to have, if this is something that this group or a collective of senior advisory board, youth advisory board, friends of the senior center, friends of the youth center wants to do, I think you almost have to engage with the local restaurants, because there will be a sense of loss if you don't tactically do it correctly. But I think there is a way to do this.
When I was at a
If you look
conference
at-
in
Sorry.
when I was at a conference in San Francisco, I learned a really cool program that they had, the city of San Francisco had, was restaurants specifically. So basically, individuals have vouchers, and they can go into various restaurants to select a meal from those restaurants off of a pretty much a modified menu. And what that allowed them to do, not only have a meal, but also meet their cultural needs, right? A variety of different restaurants they can go to. If they're a vegetarian, they can go to certain places. But you know, it was a really cool program. I tried to look into it more, and I just kept hitting dead ends when I make phone calls. I'm like, hey, how does this work?
But you got to build a tax advantage into it, because I think there's a tax deduction. So if they donate to a nonprofit, which could be the Friends group, could be the senior group, and you do it in that way, you've almost got to bring a tax accountant into that to understand. So then you market it based on the tax advantage, because right now they see it as A, you're taking space, B, you're taking, you know, but you've got to build. And the only reason I know that is because that's how we found headway in affordable housing, and is so understanding the tax components on this.
Makes sense.
So Harold, is there a restaurant group that is through the chamber or some other organization that?
Chambers where you'd have to go and probably facilitate the conversation there. I would probably sketch. I wouldn't just go immediately there. I would kind of sketch and kind of lay out, this is what we're thinking, and having something more tangible. Because there will be that worst fear, best hope kind of thing. But it's an interesting idea, and I think
to the point that you could take some of the uncertainty out of the parameters of what's there. You know, what are the components? What will it take? And then start taking uncertainty out of some of that. Then it gets people who are risk averse a little more comfortable. Yeah. And it could do so much good. I mean, just so much good. There's so much good impact that can come out of that.
Something else, community-based,
Go ahead.
where I grew up in the Bay Area, it was the 70s, hippie time. And we had, I moved around a lot, but at the schools, they would have gardens. And those gardens were to feed people. But we learned how to garden, and it was really cool. And then we took field trips to deliver the food to the food kitchens. So I don't know if something like that is around
fund
here.
growing gardens and Longmont food rescue, and so I think there's opportunities to kind of all kinds of different.
One thing that we saw when we were talking about all this stuff is that we really needed to develop an outreach program and go out into the communities, using the GIS maps, using the information the city gave us, and find out where are the groups that we need to talk to. You know, there are groups, there are neighborhoods that people just don't come to the senior center. They don't go to a food pantry. They just stay within themselves. So we're developing now an outreach program where we're going to start to put together, you know, where we need to go. We've talked about it with a couple of us, and I happened to do Coffee with Leadership the other day as being a representative from the senior center, or the advisory board, and it ended up some people were there from the Friends group. So we got a chance to throw ideas around and talk, and they were very receptive to it and very open to it. So it's nice to feel like we could start to look into going out to the community and finding ways we can touch people and get information out from the people who live in the community. You know, they were saying, well, this might be a good idea. I wouldn't do this, but this might be a better way to do it. So we're putting together some ideas, so you'll be hearing about that.
Yeah, I would suggest, so that was something that came up with council actually in the retreat, is how do we do that? And it came out of where we're heading in terms of what we can do in terms of getting feedback and surveys, because we're no longer dependent on outside agencies. We can do that internally now. and we can get very specific. And so we talked about putting kiosks up and creating iPads, so when we have Cinco de Mayo, we have people walking around with a very succinct set of questions and what we're trying to do. Out of that came the community outreach piece. And this is another one where I would say, but we need to think a little, we meaning staff, think broader. Because what you just said, 3 weeks ago I had the same conversation with the museum. So I was talking to the museum advisory board, and they were like, well, how do we get ourselves in line for money? How do we do all of these things? And I got pretty direct in that I said, you know, when we look at who goes to the museum, it is not representative in many ways of all sections of our community. And we kind of tested this with our neighborhood impact team. Christina remembers this. I know Karen will remember this when we were dealing with parks, is how do we get different groups within the organization to program at parks so we can help manage some of the issues we were having in that. And I was channeling Carmen, I was channeling our neighborhood community and neighborhood services and all of these folks in that I think to get people to some of our facilities, you can't come here. You have to go there.
Exactly.
And you have to go there and understand everything about the neighborhood. And how do we work with our cultural brokers, and how do we work with the different folks within our community, where we go to the neighborhoods and establish authentic relationships with the neighborhoods. And we do it holistically in the sense that I know I'll get Nextlight to go there, and they could potentially probably fund some of this work, because for them it's about getting customers. You know, I would love, if you're all building this, how do we get CYF out at these events? How do we get museum out of these events? How do we get public safety out at these events? So that we're all supporting each other in this desire to build a whole community. And I'm seeing a lot of folks starting to play around with this. I would say, pull it into all of these systems, and how do we think at an even higher level and more globally? Because I think it ties back into how do you build community, how do you build neighborhoods.
That's what it is, the
Yeah.
outreach, you're doing outreach,
Yeah.
you're not waiting,
You're
inviting them
learning
to
to
come.
trust the people who are
Right.
coming to
Then
them.
you have a trust level, that they know you, so I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation yesterday where it was about businesses, and obviously, you've seen some things in the paper, and I said, you know, I think what we all collectively need to realize is, I said, my friend structure is not what you would anticipate. My friends are not the people that I don't have friendships with what you would consider to be the power brokers or things like that in the community. My friendships are people that I grew up with my kids and other areas. And when I'm talking to them, if I listen to the business community, it's like, well, you don't care about business. If I talk to people that are neighborhoods or cultural brokers, I hear things like, you only care about things like hotels or businesses. You don't care about us. And we've got to find a way to bridge that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the hook that we need to talk about, because we care about everything. And at many times there's tension points in the decisions that are being made and how we're doing it. And my point to that group yesterday was, we need to start thinking about ourselves, and we need to think about the community and how we're approaching it. And I think that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, they need to feel that they're part of it.
Right.
You're kind of like, and they can become part.
And
Because
it's
they get too excited. Oh, I want to be part of it.
And it's incredibly important today based on the narrative that is being set at the national level.
Right, exactly. We're gonna need to depend on each other.
Right.
You know?
That's why we're part of the outreach.
Right. Anything else?
Are you leaving?
Would you like to?
I just wanted to throw something really strange out.
Okay.
You?
I'm not doing something.
I've got to leave soon.
John gets to go first. I want to hear his strange thing.
So I watched a presentation that, Taylor Wicklund sent to me.
I don't know the presentation, but
Yeah, it was a presentation that a city planner, he was from Asheville, North Carolina. He did it at the museum, but it was a number of years ago. It was like
smart cities.
What's that?
Smart cities?
He
Or not
was-
smart cities.
His discussion was around revitalization of the central business district and how Asheville has done an amazing job of redeveloping their downtown area and how the value of their downtown 9 years ago was like $18 billion. And that if you looked at the revenue stream that brings into the city, it's dramatically higher than the Walmart in the south part of town or maybe the Costco. And so I've lived here 9 years. I've seen businesses come and go. I've seen restaurants come and go. I've seen a little bit, obviously the apartments that were built off of Kaufman there. I've seen some things happen, but more often, I drive down Main Street, kind of looks the same way it did when I moved here 9 years ago. Is there any kind of a plan to revitalize that central business district such that we've got retail and residential and perhaps even, I'm going to talk about the third rail here, but increase the height of these buildings down here beyond 3 stories tall, because it just doesn't seem to me like it's sustainable.
Yeah, so we have the DDA that has a plan. If you listen to council in terms of how they talk about the STEAM area, which think of First and Main, in that area from probably Pratt all the way to the sugar mill. There's a symbiotic relationship that exists with downtown. So you don't want to lose the character of your downtown, which is incredibly important. But where there's not character, you want to use that to build the density that you need. And I actually think, and the council said this, there is a right spot for height. There's a right spot for really high dense living environments, and there's spots that aren't ideal for that. And they've identified these major corridors in areas where that comes into play. And we're starting to see that take off. Here, this was the headwind into it that Asheville's now experienced, is it was directly connected to the Resilient St. Vrain project and removing areas out of the floodplain because most of those areas were either in a floodway or a floodplain. So as the Resilient St. Vrain project is getting completed and the LOMARs are being produced, areas are coming out of the floodplain, and I do think it's directly connected to Kaufman Street and the First and Main Transit Station and a partnership there, because that then starts bringing people, which then starts replicating what happened, what Asheville did. What they did was pretty amazing. I think I would have paid attention to the floodplains and the floodways. And I think that's the difference here, is that the infrastructure is being set so that you don't have these issues coming into play. But yeah, that's part of Kimberly's plan. That's part of what we're talking about. And I really think the kickoff is going to be the transit station. I also think that's going to be connected to rail. So there's a lot of conversations happening with rail that as we're preparing for the transit station, we're starting to really contemplate the idea of potentially needing a temporary platform, or how do we build a design of a platform, because we're starting to hear rumors that with Front Range Passenger Rail, and there's this whole thing happening at the state level, that it wouldn't surprise me, they're going to have to come for a ballot for taxes for the full Front Range from essentially the Wyoming line to Trinidad. My gut's telling me that they're going to want something running sooner rather than later, and I'm starting to hear that, to where they want to show that we're actually doing something versus the world we've been in with RTD and the Northwest Rail Line. So when you start thinking of all those components and you're aligning rail with bus, with Ride Longmont, all of a sudden the synergy starts getting created that I think facilitates that because the economics are important. The headwinds we've had, high interest rates, inflation, high cost of materials, that's different today, but I think when interest rates started doing this, we started seeing more interest, and then but every downtown plan, steam plan, first and main transit plan, all of those contemplate those issues. And I think those plans are essentially saying, if we're going to do something really dense, it needs to be in this area because when you think of the topography and then you think of how the sugar mill set with topography, you could have more height that doesn't look that way because the topography is structuring it and it makes it look different. So yes, that's in all of these plans.
Okay, so, but that's the reason that we're not building higher story buildings in, say, just east of us on Main Street.
Well, you also have neighborhoods very close to that. I mean, again, it's you're managing trying to manage all these variables. But I think when you look at our plans, not only that area off of First and Main, where the junkyards are, but Sugar Mill, they've talked about it with North Main and more of the commercial areas. Hover 119, kind of I think another area that's showing itself is where the old Walmart was with Nelson and Hover. Being very tactical because you don't want to build an 8-story facility adjacent to a neighborhood. So those are some of the things that those plans contemplate.
Okay, thank you.
Arlene?
Okay, so, this has nothing to do with the feds or the state or anything, this is just sort of a local issue, and I may be off on my dates here. But it seems to me that possibly next year will be the 50-year anniversary of the senior center.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, is now the time to start thinking about this?
Yes.
And are we doing anything, and are we communicating this? What are we doing? Or is it something that is just gonna sort of go away?
We as a staff are working on organizing a celebration for it.
So can we get communication on this?
When we as a staff have the chance to pull it together.
Cool.
But we have some ideas in the works. We don't have anything set in place, but yes, once we have it, yes.
Okay.
That reminds me of something for Harold. Are we doing anything in Longmont for 2025?
Is that the
Isn't it like 300?
It's a big word.
I think our comms team is where I think if I'm thinking it's the same thing, I think they are having some conversation on that. But I can't remember.
Unless you're
2, 3. I'm trying to figure out.
2026,
2026. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yes.
which is the
2026.
200th anniversary of
Right. Yeah.
country. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, there's somebody's having some conversation, but I'll have to follow up on that.
I was just wondering when we had the last one, my city went nuts. I mean, they had parades and they had people. Everybody wore beards and everybody had top hats. It was really like a week-long type of thing. So
Yeah.
when I realized we were having another one, I was like, "Whoa, I'm here for that." It was great.
All right. Anything else? Harold, thank you so
Sorry I
much.
took all your meeting.
No, it was great information. I want to thank you for the hopeful challenges you've given us. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harold.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Harold.
you.
Yeah.
Challenges. It's very informative.
Ronnie?
Sure.
Thank
We
you,
got
Joe.
5 minutes. I'll
All right.
go, I'll go quickly.
You've got 5 minutes.
I'll go quickly. Because we have a lot of other things we need to do. All right, so welcome home dinner. Everybody received the email for March 19th, 6 to 8 p.m., Longmont Museum. If you have not responded to me, yes or no, advisory board, please let me know. Friends board as well. I'll connect with our friends board again as well. I just want to make sure we have enough food and seats in place. We're very limited in space, so I need to know who and how many. So if that's you, yes or no, just let me know if you plan on attending.
I mean, what's the dress code? Is it kind of a business casual kind of thing? Or
It'll
what's-
be, yes, and once I know who's attending, I can communicate that out. Yes, we are flannels, shorts, jeans, and tennis shoes. We're very, we're dressing down, absolutely. And that's, that's just culturally meeting our Northern Arapaho friends where they're at, and that's just what we do. So,
Gotcha.
yeah. We are set to visit. Advisory board talked about advisory board hosting a dinner for March 21st. Dinner will be set at 6 p.m. We can start setting up around 5 o'clock here in our cafeteria. Again, we need to start having conversation and what we want that to look like. Yes, Ann.
Could you clarify that?
When I mean a host, I threw it out there. We could do a potluck. It could be a theme thing, meaning bringing in a grill, burgers, steaks. Advisory board, right? We'll do some steaks and some filet mignon. Whatever we want to do, we just need to organize so we don't have 9 people bringing the same exact thing. But I would love for our board to host that dinner for our Northern Arapaho friends and our participants.
So are you looking at a potluck, or could we do something like a food truck?
If that's what we would like to do is
Do we need to decide today? I mean, is that what we're talking about here? Because it's coming up here.
we could plant that seed and
Yes.
I'll send an email out and we could just field responses from there and I can put it on a document. This is what we're thinking. How do we go from there? But yes, we need to figure this out here soon. We will be yes.
We won't be able to get together, this is our last time
Right.
together to decide, because we can't meet.
Exactly. So if we want to walk out of here with that information, absolutely. If not, I can send out an email and you're all just replying to me and I can share their feedback that we got and then it'll just be a longer process, but
Okay.
we can still figure it out.
Okay.
If we want to have some time to think about it.
Good.
Yes.
So if we do need to meet for any reason, we can just post it.
Yeah.
We can always have a meeting,
That is
we
true.
just have to post it. I'm
With
beginning to
24 hours in
realize
advance.
that's our
24 hours.
way.
24 hours? 48 hours. I think it's
24.
I'll double check that.
Yeah.
It's 24 or 48 hours in advance, but yeah. But
Listen.
maybe it's 24.
Let's decide on that because the time is getting pretty short. How you want to proceed with that? Maybe we'll meet again, do a potluck or do a food truck, something. So let's get.
Right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do y'all want to do?
I would almost say do both. Do food truck for the meat, the protein, whatever, and then do a potluck
Desserts.
with all the sides.
How many people are we
What do you think of
expecting?
that?
How many people do you think?
So I would say plan for roughly 50. They have their 20 participants, we have our 20 participants, and I'd say roughly 6 of their staff and 6 of our staff.
I'm
Roughly
not in
6 of our
favor
staff.
of a potluck.
No, it can get too chaotic.
Well, I bring a potluck for 50 people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a big.
Food trucks cost money.
I think let's if we're gonna do a food truck, we're not gonna do potluck. There's gonna be cost involved.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what we have available to us unless the friends get involved.
They're doing their own.
Yeah, I knew that.
They're hosting a dinner.
Yeah.
So that's
Do we have funds available? We really don't, do we? As
Can
a
we
board?
chip in?
I would be willing to chip towards food truck. I think it's something to think that we really need to think about this.
Let's-
I have real concerns about potlucks, so, I'm
Yeah.
not,
Mine too.
yeah.
Let's table it for just for today. Let's get through your meeting and let's
yes.
send the information out to people what our choices and options are next day or two. All right.
Cost.
We're set to visit the Wind River Reservation July 9th through 12th.
Oh.
So basically the same format we have when they're coming here to visit us in March, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, coming home Sunday. 9, 10, 11, 12, yeah. Coming home
So
Sunday.
you have the July dates.
I got them
Awesome.
yesterday. Right. So brand new information.
And let me just remind everybody one thing, when Ronnie sends us emails about the food choices and stuff like that, we can't reply back to everybody.
So
It
what
has
I,
to go straight
what I
back
do
to
is
Ronnie.
I blind copy everybody. So all the emails I send you are blind copied. So when you reply to me, only I can see it. You can't see each other's responses.
Okay.
We're pretty good about that too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only ones you can see, and I'll typically CC Christina and Bianca on those. So you'll see their emails. They're the only ones that would.
Just a pause here. Can we take an extra 10 minutes so you can get your report without going an extra
Yeah.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind? 10 more minutes? Okay, go ahead.
And I should hopefully move before then.
Take a breath.
Vans, we are in the process of getting those purchased right now. Our original budget that the Friends approved was $200,000. When it was time to go to purchase, with inflation of cost of everything going up, there's an $18,000 difference. Went to the Friends board, they approved that additional to fund that additional expense, and Fleet right now is in the process of securing those 2 vehicles. And so once I have an idea of when we would receive those, I'll share those out. I reached out yesterday to Fleet, and there was no updates at this time other than they submitted everything. They're just waiting for everything to be approved.
What does that mean? The purchase is being approved, or you said we have the money.
Yes.
Now what happens?
So we submitted, how would I explain that? We submitted the paperwork to have the city purchase these vehicles through Fleet, and then the Friends will reimburse the
Yeah,
city.
okay.
So we're just in the middle of that process right now. Completing the 2024 annual board reports. Been working with John, working with Dave on from last year's statistics, what our goals are for 2025, and we'll have that report available at our April meeting. So just we're putting some final touches on that, and it'll be ready to go for our next board meeting. Staff updates: we've hired full-time office assistant Hector Martinez. Most of you have had a chance to meet him by now. He's doing fantastic. And we've all learned at this point, I've sent out emails to both of our boards that Amy Hodge is no longer with us, our Senior Recreation Program Supervisor. She accepted a position with the town of Windsor. It's a great opportunity for her, and much closer to home as well. Her last day with us was last Wednesday, and so we're in the process of reviewing applications to fill that position, and hopefully setting up interviews by next week is my goal. So just want to make sure we have the right candidates to move forward with setting those up. We also brought on Chelsea Freitas, who is our part-time morning front office receptionist, and we also have learned that we have lost, we're going to be losing Isha Montoya, our evening program supervisor. She's moving to Greeley, and so her last day with us will be the 11th, so I'll be working to fill her vacancy as well. So there's that, and where we're at with our Go catalog right now, we're working on on proofreading our final touches for our Summer Go catalog, which is made through August. And we'll be submitting our final copy to our graphic designer in the next, I'd say the next couple weeks, with prints. I believe, sorry, off the top of my head, is the first week of April. Isn't that crazy? We're already working. We're talking about programs for May through August. This year's moving too fast, and so
Always does.
yeah. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Anything else? Any other items? Thank you all for participating today with Harold. That was great. Motion to adjourn?
Thank you for inviting us.
No, I'm glad you all came. Motion to
Oh, we have
adjourn?
one more board updates.
Oh, too late. Okay, go ahead.
City Council. Matthew Popkin, council member Matthew Popkin, is overseeing 4 boards, including ours. So the expectation for Councilmember Popkin is that if we need him to attend like a meeting today, we'll reach out in advance, so have him put it on his calendar to see if he can attend. I reached out for today's presentation. He was already scheduled for to do work, yeah, out of state. So he was not able to attend this one, but the expectation with that is, if we're not reaching out to say, hey, we'd like you at this specific meeting, the expectation is that Councilmember Popkin will review the recordings of our meeting and the agenda as well.
And maybe look at doing a quarterly invite. I think that could.
Motion to adjourn?
Okay.
Second, and we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.